this is a very complex issue and with an equally complex solution.
Traditionally and even currently, there's enormous prejudice against people with addictions.
You know, it wasn't very long ago where, you know, somebody could go out and if they weren't ready for help or they couldn't receive help, then we'd say, well, maybe next time, or maybe next week, or maybe next month. But unfortunately, with heroin and opiates out there, next week could be a funeral.
It knows no socioeconomic class, it knows no race, it knows no gender. I've arrested all ages, all races, all socioeconomic classes. This drug does not discriminate.
3 out of 4 people who are currently experiencing a heroin use disorder started with prescription opioids.
It was widely accepted in my school, I'd say. A guy I sponsor now, he was my idol in high school. He was valedictorian. You know, he gave the speech at graduation. He was the all-star lineman. He had the most beautiful girlfriend in high school. He was the guy. And he was doing pills. So if he's doing pills, why wouldn't I?
I think the thing that's different now from past heroin epidemics, if you will, is that people were primed to use and like heroin by the misuse of the prescription opioid meds. That's what's new now.
Kasey was the kind of kid that I just thought was a typical little boy, really. I mean, he just was into all kinds of things. He played softball and basketball and soccer. He was all about anything that had wheels and a motor. And he saw that the neighbor up the road had a VW bus, and so he decided that when he got his graduation money, that was what he would spend his graduation money on, was this bus. When I first heard him say the word heroin, it really still, as ridiculous as it sounds now, I really didn't fully grasp what that meant, because heroin had not been in my vocabulary. Addiction really had not been in my vocabulary. And so I told Kasey one day, I said, maybe if I'd been stricter with you, Kasey, maybe, you know, I just wasn't strict enough. And he said, it was never about you guys, Mom. I would have found a way. He never wanted us to know. And that was the thing that every overdose where he was able to talk afterwards, that he would say, I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry, Dad. I know I'm a big disappointment to you. And we would always say to him, you know, no, you're not. We just want you to be happy. But what we didn't realize was Kasey had lost the ability to be happy, because the heroin had robbed him, as Steven Tyler once said, you know, drugs rape you and rob you. And they do, and they did. They took Kasey's brain first, then they took the spirit of who he was, and then they took his life.
Happy birthday to you.
I was the life of the party, even as a child. I brightened up every room that I walked into. I was always telling jokes. I was always on. making everybody happy. That was my only goal. Because if you're happy, I'm happy. I don't like people to be upset. Middle school's when I started feeling bad about myself, you know. That's when I realized I was the fat, weird kid. Really. I mean, and that's what I was. I mean, I look back at pictures, I was the fat little weird kid, and I didn't like it. And I didn't know how to do it. So I started off, my first pill I ever took was a diet pill. That's where it all started.
I grew up in a really normal, loving home. In our house, we had to be involved in at least 2 school activities. It was a rule, couldn't get out of it. I always took that to the extreme. I was in probably every sport, basketball, volleyball, cheerleading. I was voted most spirited, and I was voted prom queen. So I thought that was really fun. And my mom loved it because I think she was trying to relive her high school days through me. I was on drug-free club, student council, tried to just really get involved because I wasn't very good in school. I thought, all growing up, I just thought that I was really stupid. But really I was dyslexic, and I didn't find that out until later. So I just learned a little differently.
I went years making myself throw up because of that. You know, I hated my own image. I hated it. Once I started getting high, though, I realized none of it mattered. I didn't have to do that anymore. I didn't have to take diet pills. I didn't have to worry about what I ate. Because when I got high, I became that kid again. At the beginning, I became that kid again, and I'd make everybody laugh. And when everybody's laughing, they're not really looking at me. They're not really worried about what I look like, you know.
And then I did start drinking and smoking pot. And when I did those things, I thought that I was, I guess, funnier or could relate to people better. It just made me feel like I fit in better. Once I started going to NKU, I started smoking a lot more. Started doing that. I started dabbling in some pills and cocaine, and it was just party time for me. The guy I was dating at the time, he was at NKU also, and he was in a fraternity, and he was NKU's local drug dealer. He started being really distant from me. Didn't show up when he was supposed to, all this stuff. It was just really odd behavior. So I had finally confronted him. Figured out that he had started using heroin with another friend of ours. And at that time, I didn't know anything about heroin. I thought it was just in the movies or, you know, in New York City or not in northern Kentucky.
I'd say I probably started in 2005. By 2007, I had graduated all the way up to Oxycontin 80 milligrams, and I was doing 4 to 6 of them a day, depending on finances. I was crushing them up and storing them. And Oxycontin and heroin to me are extremely similar in effect, but the one main difference is that the best way I've ever been able to describe it is when I do an Oxycontin or a pill, it gives me a sense of, it gives me a falsehood of being royalty. When you do heroin and you inject it with a needle, it gave me a falsehood of being a king.
I can't even describe it. It was every good feeling that you could ever possibly imagine happening all at once. Inside your body and inside your mind. It's just an explosion of wonderfulness. That's really what it was. And I searched and searched for that high for 7 years, and I could never get that same high ever again. That's what you do, is you chase that first high. You chase it until you're done.
We now know from brain scans that the good feeling chemicals like dopamine and serotonin get triggered by heroin, triggered to a greater extent than virtually anything else we can do.
Simply telling someone, you want to stop, don't you? Why don't you just stop? Becomes increasingly difficult. And it amazes me that even 5% of people are able to just will themselves out of this.
All the drugs that people become dependent on, one way or another, activate that same circuitry in the brain. And so, for example, if you use heroin, you get a huge rush of these same pleasure chemicals, and they're far, far more than you would ever get from even the best meal or from the best sex. It overwhelms our sort of hardwired in evolutionary reason for having these chemicals in the brain in the first place.
And we all have experienced those chemicals in our brain. When they're clicking, we feel wonderful. We feel excited about life. We feel excited about ourselves.
So it's like your brain is automatically wired to say, yeah, I like that, let's do that again.
Brain chemistry becomes aberrant. The capacity for normal rational thought becomes impaired. Judgment becomes impaired. Your brain really is impaired on a physical, organic level, both at the voluntary and involuntary level.
And keep in mind that many people's lives are, there's a good deal of despair in a lot of people's lives. They may be in jobs that's going nowhere. They don't see making more money down the road. They're struggling with the money they're making. Their kids are not doing well. So there's a lot of discouragement, despair, and that makes the person at high risk for escaping through use of heroin.
It is more likely to happen when people have suffered from trauma, for example, when they have deep-seated depression or anxiety, other kinds of psychosocial problems that they're dealing with.
One of the most distressing things I read on social media is people that have this attitude. It's like, well, you did it to yourself. I'm sorry you did this. It's like, one of the things I'll say in a town hall meeting is raise your hand if you've never done anything stupid. It doesn't mean you deserve to die for it.
My name's Molly, and I'm a full-time student at Northern Kentucky University. I've been struggling with heroin addiction for about 16, almost 17 years now. I started writing when I was real little. I've always my dad used to read to me before bed every night, and I think that had a big influence on me. I'd written for some zines back in the 90s. I'd done some stories, and I'd really enjoyed it. And I was like, I'm gonna write for Rolling Stone, and I'm gonna do big things, and I don't know, it was just a dream. I feel like it's this big secret that I can't let anybody in on, because it'll just mess everything up. Everybody will look at me differently, and just this whole stigma, the worthless junkie stigma. I'm already the punk rock girl with all the tattoos. I don't want to be the junkie punk rock girl with all the tattoos. It's very time consuming. A lot of times I'll be late for classes because in the morning I have to get up and go buy drugs in order to function. Because in the morning when I wake up, I'm sick. So I will immediately go meet a drug dealer to get more heroin.
All right. He just texted me and said I gotta go to Milford, so I'm gonna drive all the way to Milford to meet him. Yeah, I don't like to think about how much money I've spent on this shit, this stuff. Because I could be a millionaire for real.
And sometimes he's running late, and I don't make it to class in time, so it interferes with school. Or sometimes I'll miss class because I couldn't get heroin and I'm sick.
I think that's one of the other complexities of this issue is the physical withdrawal is real. It's not willpower. People aren't usually doing heroin to necessarily get high. They're doing it not to feel sick anymore. I mean, we've had people come through here breaking into homes, puking on the side of their car, trying to steal items so they can go down and get heroin. It literally is a physical illness.
I'm going up to like the Blanchester exit. I think it might be Route 28. I'm not for sure. And I will meet this guy there and get some drugs from him and go back to my house. He'll tell me like to come to a certain spot, and then I'll sit there and wait for him. It's usually like a gas station or something. And then when he comes in, I'll follow him to wherever he goes, like down a side street. And then he'll turn around and drive back by and hand me the dope, and I'll hand him the money out the window. So, pretty quick, painless process. Like, this is what I just bought. And I guess it's what you would call China white. Like usually I go on my neck, like right there or right there, but I've been having some trouble, and like once you've like been shooting up for so many years, then it's hard to find a vein. So you have to start getting creative, I guess. So I would go on my groin or my neck. But recently I found a spot in my arm that I'm able to go in. So that's what I've been doing when I can. And then you gotta put water on it. And then you gotta heat it up. And you can see like it's got cut in it. Like that's all the stuff like going to the center. Like you pretty much like feel it like automatically. Well, not automatically, but within a few seconds. It gets like kind of an initial rush, which I'm getting right now, and it's like you feel this warm sensation like moving through your whole body slowly. I'm quite disgusted with myself, honestly. I don't know. This is not where I envisioned I would be at 35, 36, however old I am now. Way too old to be, doing drugs, for sure. But the thing that bears the most shame or carries the most shame for me is not being able to fulfill or attain or achieve the goals and dreams that my parents had for me.
I know in my experience, I wasn't going to tell someone that I was suffering from addiction because of fear. I'd lose my job, my family would shun me, my friends would disown me. So I would continue to manage the withdrawal symptoms to a point where I could function like a normal human being. It's often a misconception that this is a choice. For a while it was a choice. It it was something I did with my friends. We thought we were, you know, in the crowd and we were cool, and it was a social event. And then one day I tried to stop and I started experiencing withdrawal symptoms. And the scary part is somewhere between that, where it was fun on the weekends thing, and 10 years later, somewhere in there, I became physically dependent upon heroin, opiates. I don't know when that was. I don't think anybody can really pinpoint that moment. Well, if I do one more pill or one more shot, I'm going to be addicted. It just happens.
For me, it was this obsession that I was willing to throw all my morals, everything about myself down the drain for this obsession. I had to have this. I didn't care if that meant stealing from you, lying, cheating. Doesn't matter. It was just this obsession, and it turned me into a monster.
Norwood Kroger's. There's a Kroger's up in Norwood, real big Kroger's. I was over there with a guy that I consider to be my brother. We were using together. We didn't have any money. His dad was at work, so he couldn't steal from his dad. And he proposed the question, why don't we rob a little old lady? So that's what I did. And I hate talking about it because it makes me want to cry right now. But we did. We pushed her down and we took her purse and we left. And I felt terrible about it. And then I got high and I didn't feel terrible about it. But then I woke up the next day and I remembered it, so I had to get high again.
I mean, if you don't have gainful employment, you don't have any income. So you have to resort to doing illegal things or things that you don't want to do.
I was not raised to steal from my grandma. I wasn't raised to take things that weren't mine.
If you go back and look at my institutional record here, you'll see that I'll go for a few semesters and everything will be fine, and then I'll disappear for a semester. And it's because things have fallen apart and I just can't do it. I just can't do it anymore. And then I'll go to jail or whatever, and I'll get out and get it back together and come back. And that's why it's taking me 20 years to get a 4-year degree.
Now, you may have read where Ohio's prisons are very overcrowded, in part because of the drug users that are in those prisons. And politicians are beginning to rethink that because you can't afford it.
So I think what we need to do, and what I'm trying to push, and several of us in law enforcement are trying to push, is maybe the user going into jail is not the answer. Maybe we need to assess them and they need to go straight towards some type of treatment.
You know, what we have done historically is wait until a person has crashed and burned, and then we try to resurrect them from the ashes. We have allowed them to become criminals, and then thankfully we've tried to provide some treatment in the jails, but that has only come lately. That was not being done for a long time. Thankfully now we do have programs in the jails that can hopefully stop the progression so that the person doesn't get caught up in that revolving door of the criminal justice system.
It's not for everybody, but we're trying to cover as much ground as we can. Every person in here right now is consuming the tax dollar. So what we want to do is increase quality of life, so increase community, sense of community and family, and get these individuals out there contributing to the economy instead of draining the economy. Do I ever think it's just going to be an empty building? I highly doubt that, but the least we can do is give them the help and the care that they deserve while they're here.
And it was the widespread availability of those prescription opioids and frankly the sort of legitimacy that came from these being prescribed medications. You know, people thought, oh, well, they, you know, my doctor gave this to me, or these are medications, whether my doctor gave them to me or not. These aren't street drugs, so they must not be so dangerous, right? And turns out that was way wrong.
You know, all the football players, the basketball players, all of the players, the sports players, they all had them. I remember sitting in the locker room in gym class before class had started, and I looked over, and a couple of guys were swapping pills back and forth each other. You know, muscle relaxers and nerve pills and Xanny bars and pain pills. And, you know, it was just like a huge cocktail of prescriptions going around just the everyday out in the open locker room in my high school. And to see the kids that I looked up to, because I wasn't a big jock, but everybody looked up to them in my school, and that's the way it was, is to see them doing it, I thought, well, that's my in, you know. I can get pills. I've got them. I do them all the time. I can help them get them. I can do them with them. Ergo, I'm going to be popular too.
And America became a country that, I mean, we use 80-90% of the world's painkillers for a country that has a fraction of the world's population. And I mean, the amount of Vicodin or hydrocodone, oxycodone that we use is staggering. And it got to the point where even the way doctors get paid and hospitals get paid was based on patient satisfaction surveys. And the biggest question on there was your pain adequately managed? And that became the driving force on even how doctors are paid. So what are doctors motivated to do? Manage pain. So what do? They open up their prescription pads and they're giving out painkillers like candy.
So when Ohio cracked down on the pain clinics and the pill mills, which was rightfully so, we'd already created this market of opiate addicted people. And drug cartels are unfortunately some of the best business people in the world.
With heroin being so cheap and so readily available at the same time as Oxycontin getting pushed off the streets, it was the perfect situation for people of my generation to start using it. And it was the new party drug because it was so available, you know.
So before I did it, I didn't even really research it. I mean, I just didn't. It's like, okay, something new, let's do it. Okay. I had no idea that it was as powerful as it was. It was just something to try.
The addiction of heroin was something that I don't think any of them were prepared for. They had no clue what they were dealing with until it was too late. I said, when Kasey died, an advocate was born, and that was me. And so I said I was a mom on a mission. I was like a loose cannon shooting off in all directions, hoping that I would hit something. I don't think there's anything more powerful than a mom on a mission. Don't mess with moms, because it's moms that get things done.
It's not about judgment and it's not about politics. It's about people who are dying from an epidemic. And I want you to know something today. Your stories matter. Your lives and the lives of our loved ones matter. Because I can tell you for a long time I felt like the Lone Ranger. And I am so glad that I don't have to feel that way anymore.
When Holly and I found out that Nicholas was using heroin, of course we were devastated. We were ashamed. We were the last thing we wanted to do was talk about it.
We lost Nicholas to a heroin overdose in our home. He died in our bathroom, and of course we were just devastated by it. We're still devastated by it. I don't know that we will never. I don't think the pain's ever going to go away.
When I was young, my father had problems with alcohol, and it was always the big secret, the big family secret. Well, we weren't going to have it be that way with Nicholas.
Substance abuse, abusers deserve recovery, not incarceration. Addiction is a disease, it's not a crime. And what we need are laws written by legislators who can tell the difference. Yeah.
We do like to be in your face, hence the word hates. We hate heroin, and we hate what it's doing to our community, and we hate what it's doing to our families.
Nicholas passed away in August 2013, and in June 2014 we had our first 5K, and it was unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable to see the people there. And every single person, when they walk up to me and they say, oh, there's almost always a spark or a light in their eye. We've been to your 5K. We're going to get wins for 5K. So there must be something there that's even bigger than we realize. It's not about the running. It's not about the food. It's not about the T-shirts. It's a lot deeper than that. I think seeing the photos of loved ones that have passed away makes it even more real, because I think a lot of folks have a vision in their mind what a heroin addict or an alcoholic on the streets look like. It's going to be the worst of the worst. It's not going to be a beautiful blue-eyed blonde cheerleader. It's not going to be a curly blonde-haired guy. I think that helps people that may be there and have not had a loved one that have been affected by this disease. When they see those folks up there, they can see their nephew or their cousin or their spouse. They can see what people really, really look like that are suffering from this addiction.
You know, in those early days when I was out there by myself, I was writing articles for the paper. I was ringing all the bells and blowing all the whistles that I knew to do, and nobody was paying attention. And unfortunately, I think it was because not enough people had died yet. But I think, you know, more people have died, and more people have died that society deems worthy.
A common outcry by African Americans, Hispanics, Latinas, and Latinos have traditionally and historically always called for this addressed need to get help, to seek help, to set up opportunities to alleviate this problem of addiction.
People thought that nobody cared about them. They were the bums. They were the people that didn't matter.
And so throughout the 20th century, 21st century, we criminalized them. Well, we entered the 21st century now, and we have individuals who have been prescribed opiates. This has become addictive. We've known that opioids have been addictive for centuries, right? I mean, we have opioid addiction from the 1800s and 1700s, and Great Britain used it to colonize India, right? It's always been this addictive process, so it's no surprise that people are becoming addicted to it. But what is a surprise is that whites are addicted to it.
Because I said the way we've treated addiction is like the way they treated the lepers in biblical times. They are the disenfranchised, they are the marginalized. They are the people that don't matter. That's in some people's view.
And so it's disheartening, and it's unfortunate that we have incarcerated generations, and we've lost generations of African Americans to a what has supposedly been a violent problem, but for this entire time has been a health problem.
I remember in trying to advocate for the Grateful Life Center that I would go to all these different meetings where we were trying to get property to build on, and they would talk about those people. And I would leave those meetings and I would think, oh my gosh, you know, I said I didn't know whether to cry or to cuss. I just was so angry and so sad and just so hurt by the way that my son was being talked about. Because someone said to me, well, Charlotte, don't take it personally. I said, it is personal. They're talking about Kasey. They're talking about my son when they talk about those people. He was one of those people.
I remember I went into one of the regular pharmacies that I was used to going to, and the pharmacist was like, I can't sell them to you without a prescription. And I stood there for a minute, and cause I was mad, honestly, and I looked at him and I said, sir, I've got hepatitis C and I'm trying not to spread it around. I'm an IV drug user. And he got quiet, and he went ahead and sold them to me, and he actually wrote a prescription for me so that I could come back and get them and not have any problems. It was kind of ironic because I was at the doctor's office with my parents, and I saw this big sign on the wall, and it said how high the hepatitis rate has gone in the last few years, and it's kind of gone up as the pharmacies began to stop selling needles, and I think that the two are definitely related. Well, if you look at a needle or a bag of needles, insulin needles, they're diabetic insulin needles. It'll say use once and destroy. But when you're an addict and you're shooting up several times a day, you don't use once and destroy, especially when pharmacies aren't selling you more needles. You use maybe a couple thousand times and then it destroys itself. Yeah, they get so the numbers are worn off and they're kind of bent up, and it hurts to stick it in. But yeah, I've just used needles for so long that they got weak, and the scar tissue where I was shooting up was so thick that the needle just broke off, and I actually have one stuck in my neck right now and one stuck in my groin. I think people definitely need to educate themselves before they speak out about something. For the needle exchange isn't just handing out needles to anybody that walks in the door. You know, you have to turn in needles in order to get a needle. So it's not actually putting more needles on the street. And they also have like HIV testing and like treatment information, lots of resources that they can hook you up with if you're interested, like in getting into treatment or getting on methadone or anything like that.
So why haven't we had a big HIV outbreak? Probably because we don't have a lot of currently HIV positive people who are in these networks of people who are injecting heroin and sharing injecting equipment. It's just sheer luck.
It's here, it's creeping up, and it's waiting to explode. Because I've seen a few of them. It just hasn't climbed in the pool yet. It will. It scares the snot out of me, because it's coming. It's like floating around, and it's like a bee floating around just waiting to sting. But then if that doesn't compel you, there's collateral damage. The innocence of people that never had the disease of addiction that are going to be hurt by it. The healthcare workers, the rescue workers that have to deal with it, that inadvertently get caught. The people that are in contact with the children. Your HIV-infected mothers that aren't on treatment because they don't know they got it. They're giving birth to babies. You're Hep C infected and you have a baby. How many of these babies that are born at the hospital right now are born to drug-addicted moms? Most of them aren't going to get Hep C because perinatal transmission to Hep C is very low. Not the case with HIV. 30% of them are going to be born with HIV if they're not on medicine when mom's carrying them. Okay? So we got the innocence to worry about. We got the economic cost. You know what it costs to treat an HIV patient? About $25,000 a year. Let's get 2,000 of those, see what it does to your Medicaid budget. 25,000 times 2,000 is 50 million. So let's add that to the Medicaid budget every year. Suddenly a needle exchange clinic doesn't sound like such a big deal.
.471 runs between downtown Cincinnati and Highland Heights, Kentucky, which is a neighboring city to us. I first encountered heroin here in Fort Thomas on the job probably back in the late 90s, but it wasn't near as prevalent as it is now. Primarily what's going on is we have a whole lot of opiate-addicted users, heroin, pain pills, any type of opiate narcotic, lots of addicts that are coming from suburbs around northern Kentucky, including Fort Thomas, and they are procuring their narcotics in neighborhoods within downtown Cincinnati, and then they're traveling back across 471, 275 to return home. So what we're finding is these people, including residents of Fort Thomas, go over to purchase their narcotics, come back across, and we're seeing an increase in impaired drivers coming across 471 where they can't wait to shoot their heroin and they get under the influence and now they're driving drug impaired and causing accidents. With alcohol, obviously it affects different people different ways, and to a certain extent that's the way heroin is. It's not produced in a regulated laboratory or distillery, so when you put it into your system, you don't know exactly what all you're putting in there along with the heroin, so all of a sudden it impairs you to the extent that people are what we call on the nod. They're actually dozing off, falling asleep while they're driving. And so it just creates a much greater risk than even an alcohol impaired driver.
Pretty much since spring break, everything's kind of fallen apart, and I've managed to stay on top of 2 of my classes, but the other 2 classes I'm failing. It's pretty I don't know, uncomfortable for me because I'm a straight A student, and so getting a B is a big deal for me. And I've applied for a couple of internships, and I was really excited about one of them, and I sent them my resume and stuff a few weeks ago, and I haven't heard back from them yet, but I know some of the people that work there and kind of had high hopes for that. And at this point, my addiction's pretty bad, and it's kind of taking over, and I don't think that I would be very functional in an internship.
Health providers often don't want addicts in their waiting rooms, and that's just a reality. And so there's not a great tendency there to integrate health care with mental health addiction care.
After Kasey died, I heard someone say that your first line of defense should be your physician. And I laughed at that because my physician had wished me good luck with Kasey. That was the best I got. That's the only thing I got.
It's a primary care disease. You can say, I don't want to do this, I don't want to have a part of it, let's relegate that to addiction specialists, but there aren't enough of them. So either you turn your back on it or you step up and meet the demand.
Because opiate addiction is different, and it needs to be treated differently. And that's what we know now. I mean, the CDC is saying that the best practice for treating opiate addiction is medication plus other forms of therapy.
Well, it's very controversial. You're using an opiate to treat an opiate addiction. I believe that if I can put you on 2 to 5 milligrams of Suboxone, and that allows you to keep a job, or it allows you to maintain your family, I think that's a great outcome for society and for the patient.
We don't know. There's no guarantee. It's just like with chemotherapy for a cancer patient. You don't know if that particular chemotherapy is going to work for that particular patient or not. So I don't know that that would have made a difference for Kasey, but certainly it would have been much better than expecting him to respond to the same kind of treatment that is offered to someone who is an alcoholic.
Now, I've done everything. I've done liquid methadone, I've done wafers, I've done Suboxones, I've done Subutex, and every time I abused it. The medical community can tell you what they want. I know from personal experience, I got high on every single one, every single time. The benefit is that if Suboxone Subutex is used correctly, there is a roof on it, there's a ceiling. You can't get higher than you do, and eventually that becomes your normal, and it can help you.
It's like there's not one cure or there's not one solution. You know, everybody gets sober a different way. Some people get sober by abstinence, some people get sober through methadone, some people get sober through Suboxone. You know, some people just decide that they aren't going to use one day and don't use. I don't know how that happens, but there are some people.
I think under the right circumstances, medically assisted rehabilitation can work. That's not what worked for me.
Abstinence-based treatment has been proven to be ineffective. It doesn't work. You're throwing money in a hole. I mean, it works for some. The treatment programs that are available, they need to be modified to fit into a paradigm that works. because simply throwing everybody to counseling and rotating them through a revolving door that involves abstinence only it's not effective. It doesn't work. They can't put up numbers that show any effectiveness. There's going to have to be some incorporation with medications.
I think the person really has to be ready and willing to you know, put an effort into treatment and to want to get better.
But in my truthful, honest, wholehearted opinion, the only way that long-term sobriety, recovery, whatever you want to call it's going to work is if you completely figure out why you got there in the first place. You answer that question. Then you find somebody who you can ask help. You ask them for help wholeheartedly and you let them help you. And then from there, you move forward in your life with a little bit of faith, a little bit of a program, and a whole hell of a lot of support from people who are close by you. I mean, I don't want to say that without God in AA, because I don't know if that really goes well with the masses anymore, but without God in AA, I wouldn't be sitting right here. That's what worked for me. That's my story.
I mean, I'm realistic. I know that I'm not going to get hired by some big company like Time magazine. They're probably going to do a background check, I'm imagining. And my record's pretty lengthy because of my drug use. So I'm realistic. I know that I'm not going to be working in a typical newsroom. But at the same time, I know that there's a lot of other opportunities out there for me. And I know that I have experience that I can offer that not very many people can. Just world knowledge and street smarts and some of the things I've been through. You aren't gonna find somebody down at, you know, channel blah, blah, blah that's been to prison and was addicted to heroin. And I think that while it does hurt me in a lot of ways, I think it's also one of those qualities that you can turn around and use it for something that is a positive thing, you know. I know I have something to offer the world that not everybody has. And one of the reasons that I'm going to school too is I just want more than anything for my dad to see me walk down that aisle and get my diploma, and get my degree. And that's so important to me. That's just like, you know, like even if nobody will hire me because of my criminal record or because I'm an addict, at least my dad got to see me in a cap and gown, get handed my degree, you know.
It was really, really hard. I was 7 months sober, and we had to take Mom to the hospital. So we got her to the hospital, and they told us she had anywhere from 7 minutes to 7 days. So we didn't really know how much time we had. About 3 days into her being into the hospital, we took her to hospice, and after about a day, she passed. And it was really, really hard. I was still very new in sobriety, still learning how to deal with emotions without a mask of drugs. And then I think that's how I think God and my mom threw Austin at me right when I needed him. He was really my rock through all that. But it was hard being new in sobriety, very hard.
We both happened to be in rehab at the same time. I was at Grateful Life and she was at Brighton Center. And so one day she was in a bad way because of her mom being sick, and I had wrote her on Facebook and asked her if she wanted to go out and have some fun. And so I came and I picked her up, and it was wintertime, and I dropped the top on my convertible and we rode around. And
He always finds a way to make me laugh. And he loves family, and that's super important to me. And my mom would have loved him, so that's a given.
So I decided I was going to propose. I asked my parents if they had any ideas on how I should do it, and I ended up taking her to the field that we would dance by, and I asked her if she would marry me, and she said yes, and then we went and got Mexican food.
We did, yes.
And then the wedding day was chaotic. We got married in a gazebo. It was a small wedding, and it was outside. The people who were supposed to be in our wedding were a little wishy-washy, and so we ended up kicking everybody out of the wedding, and we had Zeus as the best man and Sasha as the maid of honor. She walked down the aisle in a little tutu.
And they carried the rings attached to their collars, and it was just beautiful. For people that aren't in addiction, that have this picture of addicts being these horrible people, I want them to know that we're not horrible. We do horrible things when we're out there, but we're not lost causes, not all of us. There's hope for an addict, and you know, just I think it's just letting them know that it doesn't mean they're bad people. I think a lot of people think that. And I wasn't a bad person, I just did bad things.